And now, Brad Bird movie number 4 as writer and director about the difficulties faced by those with superior skills struggling against a mundane world that seeks to constrain their gifts into mediocrity. If someone at Disney would like to give Brad a big hug and let him know he's a good and special boy before construction begins on the underwater Art Deco dystopia, now would probably be the time. Did you think that was a little mean? Well, not as mean as reminding me that the original Incredibles came out 15 years ago. Jesus, where did my life go? So... So this feels like it should be a lot better than it is. It brings me absolutely no joy to say that, and even less to think it, honestly. My initial thought during and after viewing The Incredibles 2 was that it was pretty decent, not as good as the first, but it was fun to revisit the characters and the world in an agreeable time compared to a lot of other things I could be doing, watching, or otherwise dealing with at the moment. But the more I thought on it, the less I liked it, and the more the problem became apparent. I say the problem instead of flaws, because flaws suggest there are multiple, easily identifiable issues rendering the film a disappointment, when, honestly, the issue is more that in an overall sense, the whole thing is just kind of airless and uninspired, which is just shocking considering the pedigree. The Incredibles, the original, was a huge deal back in 2004, a literal bolt out of the blue that managed the impressive feat of being a bar raiser for Pixar at the studio's most untouchable moment, and an especially rare treat for superhero fans back in the day to see an original take on the genre that wrung fun comedy out of the familiar tropes, but also offered an engaging story that used those tropes in a thoughtful allegory about individuality, society, power, and identity that in many ways felt like a non-nihilistic, family-friendly take on Watchmen of all things, which many fans felt at the time represented one of the best takes on the genre ever, animated or otherwise. It also felt complete, for lack of a better word. In 2004, the term cinematic universe had yet to be coined, and Pixar had only ever done one sequel, and even though The Incredibles ended on a sort of cliffhanger, it felt more like a riff on the traditions of the superhero genre to go along with all the others than a genuine promise of a direct follow-up, and writer-director Brad Bird maintained for well over a decade that he'd told the story he set out to tell and was in no hurry to rush out a sequel, but then his big, auteur, live-action, bet-the-farm blockbuster project, Tomorrowland, turned out to be a giant disaster for Disney a few years back, and now suddenly here we are 15 years later with a follow-up that absolutely feels like something that would have gotten thrown together in a hurry to cash in on the first one as soon as possible 15 years ago. Picking up literally seconds after the end of the first film, Incredibles 2 once again centers on the titular family headed by Bob and Helen Parr, aka Mr. Incredible and Elastigirl, a pair of married, semi-retired costume crime fighters living and hiding in a world where superheroes have been declared illegal because of a tortured Harrison Bergeron-esque metaphor about individualism, actually, but in universe because they're thought to cause more damage than they prevent. Having literally just finished thwarting an attempt to exterminate the last of their kind from existence permanently in the first film, the heroes and family friend Frozone are approached by the brother-sister pair of telecom billionaires with a plan to bring supers out of the shadows by putting their money and public relations muscle behind one and making a play for getting the bans lifted permanently, the nominal sequel conceit being that they've decided it's Elastigirl, not Mr. Incredible, they want as the initial centerpiece of the campaign. Gee, 2 characters where the storyline only calls for 1? I bet there's nothing else going on there. Meaning that it's the mom who takes the action hero center stage in this one, while Mr. Incredible does the tough guy flails comedically attempting to manage as a stay-at-home dad B story that allows Bird to both change up the formula and also kind of keep us from thinking too much about how similar certain elements of the eventual story are to the first one, i.e., wait a minute, you're falling for basically this again? 'Cause it's only been like a month. But that's not all that's going on. In fact, the biggest overarching problem here is that there really isn't a singular story at play as much as a dozen or so half-formed sequel ideas all crammed into one film that keep getting brought up, sort of explored, and then left to sit. Mr. Incredible's nascent emasculation anxiety seems like it's going to be the main central conflict and then just kind of isn't. He just gets over it at a certain point. I like that his big secondary the world is changing and I don't like it moment resolves in more of a, no, wait, let me take a moment and think about this, instead of just some dumb gimmick, but it's sort of anticlimactic. There's a violent is dating subplot that doesn't go anywhere. Dash doesn't even get a storyline of his own this time. Frozone feels like more of an afterthought than the first movie. Their special agent caseworker guy gets his own subplot that, actually now that I think about it, doesn't resolve at all. There's a bunch of business about a new generation of supers who get a big introduction scene and names and character traits that feel like they might become characters, but then they're really just there for a big battle sequence near the end. The main villain mystery involving a new bad guy who can hypnotize people through TV signals gets a big enigmatic build, but the shocking reveal of who he is and what it's all about is more of a, that's it. Even the big leftover plot point from the original, Baby Jack's powers, only gets advanced to the point of the other characters finding out, and that's about it. It doesn't end up becoming the main point of the movie, doesn't really go anywhere special or take the story anywhere interesting other than creating an excuse for Edna Mode to get a 2-scene cameo. Yeah, fine. Make no mistake, a baby with randomly activated powers makes for funny slapstick, and the sequences that play out as a result are some of the funniest in the film, but that's all they are. Fun bits of animation only vaguely necessitated by a story that doesn't meaningfully advance all that far from the first one until the last few moments. And even then, can't really seem to settle on what it's about, which is really unusual for a Brad Bird project. Theme is usually his strong suit, and that's the film in a nutshell. It's not bad, but it feels shockingly ordinary and unnecessary outside the very limited realm of extremely high quality, excellently executed animation. The retro-futuristic 60s style pop art aesthetic still looks great, character animation is gorgeous, the animated action scenes are never less than completely engaging and occasionally downright thrilling, but there's simultaneously too much going on and not enough reason for you to care. Or at least be meaningfully invested. I almost want to say it's like a fan film, but even that level of enthusiasm seems to be pushing it. Fan films, however frequently shallow or misguided, come from passion, and Incredibles 2 feels like nothing so much as coming from obligation. And while I wouldn't suggest that Brad Bird and Pixar were being dishonest about believing in this story and having to wait until they had one worth telling, what I can say is that it doesn't feel like that when you're watching it. It feels like a sequel that would have come out 2 years after the first one if Disney had been able to demand that they make it whether they wanted to or not. And while that doesn't equal a total letdown, it's funny, the animation is good, there's a handful of solid entertaining beats, it's far from a worthy successor, and definitely wasn't worth a decade and a half of wait. 2.5 stars. Sorry.